Hello everyone, joining me now is Justin McCullen. He's running for the planning board this year. He is one of the 3 candidates. Justin, welcome to the Needham channel.
Thank you for having me.
So first, just tell me a little bit about yourself. What is your family background? What's your professional background?
Sure. Well, thank you again for having me. Again, Justin McCullen. I grew up in Newton, next door, and I went to St. Sebastian's in 1993. Graduated from. Went to Boston University for both my undergraduate and graduate degree. I moved here about 9 years ago with my wife and then 1-year-old daughter, and we both fell in love with this place. And have subsequently, I have 2 daughters, both in the Newman School District, and we, absolutely love living in Needham. Professionally, I work at Novartis Pharmaceuticals, where I manage the emergency management and business continuity program for the research and development arm for the organization. Prior to 2016, I worked at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute as emergency management and business continuity officer. Ever since we moved, probably a couple years afterwards, because of how much I love Needham, I started to become more involved in town committees, namely one trying to leverage my professional experience in helping the town out. I've volunteered for the local emergency planning committee. Following that, I was able to get a position on the transportation committee, trying to work with some issues with regards to the MBTA and overall transportation in town. After that, I continued, and where I still serve, on the Traffic Management Advisory Committee, in which since 2019, I chair. And that's a great committee to be able to use my passion for transportation and traffic to kind of better the town, see if we can find ways to mitigate some conditions that might be, unsafe, in trying to make the town safer. And most recently on a transportation planning committee that's looking at kind of holistically what we can do across every committee and board that kind of has a touch point to transportation. They all serve on this board, and we all kind of figure out and come up with solutions to find out if Needham is going in the right direction for transportation. And since 2019 have been a town meeting member for Precinct D. One of the reasons I wanted to run was because I want to be able to use my experience in logistics planning as well as emergency planning to combined with my passion for traffic and transportation to add that as a piece into the planning board.
What is your understanding of the role and the responsibility of planning board?
Sure. The planning board, obviously the position is 1 out of 5. Each member serves 5 years. The planning board gets its broad statutory authority from Commonwealth of Massachusetts general laws, specifically the Subdivision Control Act as well as the Zoning Act. And they, amongst other things, they are charged with the development and growth of the town. They are stewards of the town zoning bylaws, and they adjudicate current bylaw through the special permitting process, as well as planning. And so in planning, they would be making modifications, adds, or changes, and recommending and formulating the warrant to send to town meeting for final approval for any zoning changes or modifications.
Are there some of the areas that you want to focus on if you were elected?
I think we need to do more outreach, and I think we need to do more public engagement, in which one of the things that I've learned from TMAC, which is a very outward-facing committee in terms of the committee, its work is based on what is presented to the committee by residents or visitors.
Sorry to interrupt, but TMAC is?
The Traffic Management Advisory Committee. Right. And one of the things that I've learned from there is public engagement is very valuable. And so I want to kind of bring that to the planning board as I think it's an opportunity that I think we can do better with, and probably would have done better in the past.
So over the past few years, I think a few projects and zoning changes brought to people's attention of the planning board. There are some, I think, different opinions towards when is the right timing for zoning changes, like the muddy site. Yep. Some people say that maybe we should wait for developer coming up with some tangible proposals before we make any zoning changes. So I'm curious about what is your thought? So
that's kind of that's a very complicated question, and kind of you can unpack it in a certain way. Well, I think one fundamental kind of concept is that zoning by itself in a bubble doesn't make change happen. Zoning prohibits things, and zoning makes things possible. However, you still have to have a proposal at the table. And so by restricting things ahead of time, you're not necessarily going to make it an enticing area for, potentially for someone to come in and be able to make a offer to, develop a property. So I think there's a balance that has to be struck in order to obtain smart growth, which is, I think, what we need to go forward in. We need to balance the restrictions that we want to put on a certain parcel or a certain zone with being able to entice someone to be able to come in and want to be able to develop an area.
And also another very important factor that people right now in town frequently mentioned is affordable housing. Mm-hmm. There are many smaller homes were turned down and replaced by bigger homes. Mm-hmm. Do you think the board should propose some policies to slow down the teardown activities in town?
I think we need to be careful and respect the homeowner who has been in their home potentially for 50 or 60 years, and respect that they can get the full value of their home. Putting restrictions on a property in terms of setback, et cetera, or putting a moratorium potentially would not allow them to get the full price of their home that they've been in their whole life. I think we need to balance the characteristic of the desire to want to keep the character of what Needham is with being able to allow a person to be able to sell their home for what it's worth. I know that there was a committee that was formed, the Large Housing Committee, a number of years ago. There were some setback changes that were done. The teardown issue is an issue that's bigger than Needham. And so I think that the planning board, what they can do is to look at and study this issue externally. What have other towns of equal or comparative, comparing to Needham, what have they done? What has worked for them? What is something that those lessons learned that we can bring back to see what we can do to address this issue without a moratorium or without making further setback or further height restrictions. And if that's the end result, that's the end result. But I think we need to study first.
Are there any areas in town that you have some kind of ideas of developments that you think can help the town, like going towards to a more, like you said, a smart growth purpose?
Sure. So I think we need to evaluate our current zones. What is working? I think that we also we need to have a pause because the MBTA has put out their requirements that will affect affordable housing, and seeing how that will affect our overlays, our zoning overlays. But there are other areas over by Petco and the Charles that are areas that potentially we could, develop appropriately and smartly while keeping the characteristic of the area, as well as promoting growth and developments in those areas. Some of our industrial area, perhaps we could, reevaluate and take a look at, and seeing if there is something else that we can do from a mixed-use perspective, from green space perspective, from open space. I think there's a lot that we can do. I think we just need to take a look at and examine hard, certain areas in town.
Are there anything that you think you would have done differently than the current board? Yeah, can be anything, like process or like certain issues.
Sure. I first want to answer this question with acknowledging the service to the town of the planning board members, whether they're current or previous. This is a 5-year term. It is the longest term of any elected office in Needham. And it is a significant sacrifice of time, whether that be time away from family or work, So no matter how anyone feels about a specific decision, of any planning board member, we do have to first and foremost, I think, acknowledge the service to the town. With that being said, I think there are certainly opportunities from a process perspective that could have been done differently in the past with regards to, let's just say, Muzzy and that development. I know that there was, that seemed to go with less public comment than would be ideal. And I think that, that would have been more beneficial. Not to say that it wasn't transparent, but it certainly didn't allow people to be heard. And another lesson that I've learned from working on the TMAC is public comment is really important, and giving someone the respect of being heard. You may not be able to give them what they want in the end, and may not agree with that, but certainly you heard them, and I think that that's really valuable, and I think that that's really important.
Is there anything else that you want to add?
I think I want to foster a collaborative approach with the other statutory committees in town, in terms of the school committee, in terms of the select board, Parks and Rec. I think we can do a better job at being able to making sure that we're rowing in the right way. Mm-hmm. Each of the committees have their own statutory powers from the Commonwealth, and they're all doing what they're doing, but I don't necessarily think that they're at all times rowing in the same direction. So I think that one thing that I want to bring is, collaboration amongst the other parts of town government. I also think that it's really important, as a member of 1 out of 5 internally within the planning board, I want to bring consensus building, because I think that sometimes some votes require 4 out of 5, which is a very tall benchmark to obtain sometimes. There are going to be tough conversations. There are going to be a lot of consensus building that's going to be required, and I'm willing to do that. And I pull from my experience at my job from doing that. I work on a team, and I know that ideologically you must compromise sometimes, and in order to move forward. And so I can bring that.
Lastly, what do you think would set apart you from the other candidates?
I think my experience in working both short-term and long-term projects at the same time, strategically and operationally, that's what I do for work, both long-term planning as well as short-term tasks and short-term goals. I can bring that to the planning board. I know how to execute. And I think that, like I said, my consensus building and working, I know what it means to work on a team. And it does require, you can't come in with your own personal agenda. You're 1 out of 5. You come in figuring out what is the best way to move forward, that we can serve the town, so that we can make sure that for years to come, the appropriate smart growth decisions are being made together as a board.
All right. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you again.
And good luck on April 12th.
Thank you.